Y'all think too small, I got big dreams. You just starting, I'm way ahead at the end scenes. Started reading and dodging all of the quick schemes. Money like your Spotify, boy, I got 10 streams. Be real big, I gotta make it just for my kids and for their kids, just kids, that's wealth.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Daniel.
And this is Acquisitive, episode 8, where we break down failed acquisition deals to make sure you make it all the way to the closing table. Our guest today is Brian Amann. Brian is a proprietor of CPA Edge, a consulting firm focused on CPA performance improvement. He provides coaching and consulting services, including strategic planning, M&A readiness, transaction advisory services, and post-merger integration assistance. Thank you for joining us, Brian. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
That's a really cool background. I had no idea what you did. I got no briefing on your bias. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go in completely cold, and that's really exciting. I'm excited to have this conversation.
And I've been focused on, I am a CPA. I was a practicing CPA up until about 5 years ago. And just from an M&A standpoint, I've worked on dozens and dozens of deals that did not entail CPA firms. But the last 5 years, I've dedicated just solely to CPA firms.
And Brian is kind of, I know our theme is supposed to be, deals that didn't make it to closing, but he experienced a deal that went quite well. So he's get off our podcast. You don't belong here. You're a success story.
There's kind of, can we get to LOI? Can we get to closing? Can we get to success? Right? There's 3 legs to the journey.
Well, and so often there's just as much to learn from deals that struggle to get to closing, versus the ones that collapse. So very interesting because you saw, all of the legs of that race.
Yeah, you need to be aware of what's going on in the process between LOI and closing, and be listening and be attentive for signs, both buy and sell side, about things that are going to be work well after closing and things that are going to be challenging.
I was hoping you would give us an anecdote, a story of a deal that you saw that maybe struggled a bit, and we could discuss it in a little bit of detail. If you got an example.
Yeah, sure. I don't think I've been involved with any that didn't struggle at all. There's always something, and there's some concrete examples. I worked on a smaller deal a year or so ago, and we got to LOI, and just during due diligence, the buyer just didn't show up in a way that made the seller comfortable. And so it was nothing concrete. It was just really a feeling that they had, we're not sure about the savviness or acumen of the buyer here, and I think we're going to walk. And they went on to have a successful transaction with someone else, but it was just a gut feeling that they had. And so, I talk about M&A readiness. Well, M&A readiness, we think about M&A readiness in terms of, am I ready to be bought? But if you're not ready to be bought, you're probably not ready to buy either. And your sellers will feel that. So having your ducks in a row is just critically important to making sure that you can get to the end zone.
Yeah, we see that in the market so much right now, where non-accountants are wanting to buy accounting firms, CPA firms, and there's enough CPAs out there buying firms. Do they have a shot? You mentioned that M&A readiness. Can a non-accountant, non-CPA firm successfully buy a firm and be successful post-transaction?
Well, yeah, it's happening, right? In the last 4 years, we've seen a lot of alternative buyers show up in the market, and we've seen, private equity show up, we've seen pension funds show up, we've seen wealth management firms show up, and firms that typically don't have a history of running CPA firms. So I think they do have a shot. Again, M&A readiness there's part of it that, do we know our business? Do we understand our business? But there's a big part of it that is just, do we understand business? Do we understand how a business should be run? And I'm kind of excited about having some different perspectives come into the industry and look at things a little bit differently. CPA firms have been doing the same thing for 100 years. So some new perspectives, I think, is good for us and exciting. And it may be exciting for sellers too. We can really get exposed to some new concepts here, if you're up for that.
In this particular instance, you said it was a smaller deal. What type of, are we talking $1 million deal, a $200,000 deal, a $5 million deal?
Oh, where the sellers walked?
Yes.
Yeah, it was about a $300,000 deal.
Okay. And was it
Yeah.
a mismatch between licensure? Was it a CPA firm being bought by an alternative buyer?
No, it was CPA firm to CPA firm.
What type of kind of cues did the buyer give that maybe they weren't ready to take on a business?
I mean, some of it was just as simple as just a delay in answer to questions. And that could have been on a call, you could just feel the uncertainty in some of the
Okay.
answers. So it could show up on a call, or sometimes it showed up and there was just no response for days. And
Okay.
right, and um, that didn't demonstrate a willing buyer, or a buyer that was excited about this transaction. It just, you could really just feel their nervousness. They were in a little bit over their head, and it was uncomfortable.
Talk about the phases of deals as, pre-LOI when you're looking, and LOI where you're trying to, letter of intent, you've given it and you've maybe negotiated, or you're in the process of negotiating. After that, you have this phase of, or, really during that preliminary diligence. And I usually advise my clients who are buyers, this is the phase to be really likable and establish whether your seller is trustworthy, because they're always going to have more information than you during this process. So you have to rely on them to be trustworthy. And building that rapport will take you a long way once you're dealing with bank requirements and transaction documents. So rapport building. And then you get into the real meat of the diligence process where you're going through the books and everything. Where was this deal when the seller said, no, this fit isn't working?
It was in the beginning of detailed due diligence, I would say.
Okay.
Again, it was just, we don't really know what to ask for. We don't really understand what we're looking at when we do get what we ask for. So there was just, this discomfort that was building. I think it was, that was a good call on the seller's part. They did another transaction. They're very happy with it. They got what they wanted out of the deal. Yeah, yeah. So overall, it was a success story. I think if there's a lot of things that don't get us to closing, things come up that don't get us to closing, maybe it's a good thing, right? It's it could be worse to get through closing and be in a transaction that that doesn't work, where the chemistry's not there, where the synergies just aren't there.
Well, and when you're like sub $750,000 in a CPA firm, you're really buying the clients. At that point, you may get an employee or two, but you're mostly buying the client relationships. So
Yeah.
likability, rapport building, acumen, that's critical.
Yeah, I think from a sell side, you have to be comfortable that the buyer can fulfill the obligations and the promises that they're making. Right? You're gonna try to fulfill the promises that you're making in your book of business and the profitability of it and the team that's coming over. But where I've seen recently is on the retirement side. And we're going to come in and buy your practice, and you're going to retire after a 2 or 3 year period. And that's really more and more common, because if you look at the demographics of the CPA population, I think I heard something, and I think it said that 75% of the members of the AICPA are retirement age already.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I read that too.
Yeah, we're old. So we're going to see more and more of that. And you say, well, okay, we're going to buy your practice, and we want you to stick around for 3 years. And that's great, but understand, what is the buyer's plan for making that happen? And your typical deal, you get something up front, you've got some earnout. A big problem is the unearned earnout, right? We just don't get the cooperation from the buyer to perform and get to our earnout numbers. But from a buyer standpoint, the worst thing that can happen is the seller does everything to meet their earnouts over year 1 and year 2. And you haven't been able to fulfill your obligation to get them to retirement. We don't have the people in place. We don't have the teamwork. We don't have the structure. And the owner says, number one, a couple things happen. They either walk out. I committed to 2 years. I'm committed to 3 years. I walk out, or they have a lot of leverage from an employment agreement standpoint to stick around for another year to make sure that the clients are taken care of. So from both sides, making sure that, does the buyer have the financial wherewithal and the bandwidth to fulfill those types of promises, I think is just critical, and making sure it's successful if it does close.
There were a couple in that rapport building phase. That sounds like there were a couple specifics that the buyer could have done better, even if they were nervous, which a lot, I know exactly the tenor, or I feel like I can put myself on those calls where you have a hesitant buyer who's not even sure, they're anxious about the debt. They're anxious about, being able to take on more business. And gosh, if it's tax season, they're already stressed and maybe they're working a lot and they're thinking, what am I doing? But even if you're feeling that way, if you're trying to make a deal happen, come across more confidently to the other side. You talked about being more responsive, acting more enthusiastic and asking educated questions. What else can a buyer do to come across well to the traditional retiring business owner of a small deal?
I think it just comes down to overall readiness, and part of that is really, what are you looking for? Do you have a profile of the type of firm that you're looking for? And if you can clearly articulate that and say, okay, yes, you're my target. And you may be my target because you just showed up, but I have a profile that I'm looking for, and you fit it, or you don't. I think that's a big part of it. We still focus on. Let me back up a little bit. CPA firms can be very different firm to firm, right? We could focus on a not-for-profit client base or an industry niche, or we could be more accounting than tax or more tax than accounting. But I think too often we just look at it from a revenue standpoint. It's $1 million of revenue is $1 million of revenue. Well, $1 million of revenue is $1 million of revenue, but when you look down to how do I serve it and what will I be effective taking on and assuming into my practice, it goes deeper than that. You really need to be aware of what those things are and what the ideal situation is first. So, if you're not ready to sell, you're not ready to buy, be ready for both at all times and understand what you're looking for.
Now, in that transaction, were they trying to add additional clients and services that they already were delivering, or were they trying to get into a new vertical in accounting? Were they trying to add tax where they weren't already doing tax, or add bookkeeping where they weren't doing bookkeeping?
Yeah. No, those are good questions, and ones that that this particular buyer wasn't able to answer, which just wasn't clear what they were trying to get out of it. So it's, again, clarity is what's the avatar, what's the profile of the firm that we're looking for, and those would be great things to come in and state to a seller. Right, we see the synergy here, right? And we think we have a winner by bringing your firm and our firm and your client base here, or your team, to help understanding those synergies and what's going to make the deal tick. I think it's critical.
I find myself telling my clients, maybe it's being Southern, but compliments are free. So you can give compliments to the seller. They have, no matter what the specifics are, they have built a business that is so impressive you're interested in paying money for it. And I think that alone is enough to justify saying, wow, I'm really impressed with what you built here. I'm really excited about this. It can go a long way.
Definitely requires a lot of rapport building in a business with like a CPA, especially an old school CPA who, they've put in the work, a lot of work. Eventually,
during the transaction, after the transaction, you're going to have a relationship, right?
Yeah.
It should be a good one. It should be an effective one. You should be able to communicate with each other. You should be able to disagree. You should be able to have healthy conflict. Those kinds of things are the things that come out during the LOI process and due diligence, right? Can we work through those things together?
So something that I want to just repeat for anyone that's looking to buy an accounting firm, whether you're a CPA or non-CPA buyer, understand what service lines you're buying and how you will run those services, or how you will add to them, or how you will assume them into your firm. Even though my deal didn't work out, I was working on buying a CPA firm late last year. That was how Sarah and I actually met. And I have a lot of experience in upselling, bookkeeping, and advisory, but I am a tax professional. So my idea was to buy a tax firm that had a lot of business clients, had done a little bit of bookkeeping, but a place where I could very easily come in, upsell a ton of bookkeeping, a little bit of controller, maybe a few high-ticket CFO packages. And ultimately, the CPA that was selling it, he was okay with me being an EA, with me not having the CPA, dropping the CPA from the name of the firm, ultimately because I had a solid plan.
Yeah, have a strategy and know how you're going to execute.
If 75% of the AI CPA is retirement age, right, you can extrapolate that a lot of these sellers are going to be retiring. And when you are in either side, I think you've got to empathize and imagine and keep reorienting yourself for what the other side cares about in the transaction. And then when you're describing, Brian, with what these sell for, if somebody's willing to continue working for more than a year, they're not in it for the money usually, because it nets out. They could have just worked a couple more years and just, like I always say, throw the keys in the ravine. But they're in it for something that's less tangible than that, and that's usually legacy. Making sure that their clients are well protected and cared for, that their workers, their staff are protecting their name too. So recognizing that can go a long way in that rapport building. But you focus and you provide a lot of value, Brian, in post-merger integration. So after there's an acquisition, people bring you on to say, how do we integrate these different culture fits of these big companies? I would love to hear, some advice on that process.
Getting back to what Daniel was saying about strategy and the strategy that he was talking about with his firm, I don't know that there's any bad strategies. I think there are unknown strategies, right? So there's always more than one way to skin a cat, but having a well thought out plan is critical to getting the deal done, and having a well thought out plan strategy is really critical to making sure that the two firms integrate afterwards. So what is it that we're really trying to accomplish? And it's the same thing that you would go through in any kind of business planning, a strategic plan. What are we hoping to accomplish here? How are we going to measure that? And what do we need to do to make sure that happens? So it's a whole strategic plan. It can be as nitty gritty as we want to get everyone converted to our technology by X date. But what doesn't work, a lot of times I see or hear, what are your expectations of the new people that just came on? And it's something as subjective or ambiguous as take care of your clients, right? Well, if 3 people here take care of your clients, they can hear 3 totally different things. One might take that as no client losses. One might take that as just do a good job serving them. Another might take that as I need to get out and physically get in front of every single client that I have. Just so the more subjectivity and ambiguity that we can take out of it in our plan is what we're expecting to happen, and what the timeline is, the better off we'll be from a post-merger integration standpoint. And post-merger integration is an area where we see a lot of big fish, small fish, or whale, minnow. And I think it's a good opportunity to be a little bit more open-minded than that. And some smaller firms are a lot more nimble. They're maybe more up on technology. We saw this in a big firm merger over the last couple of years, where the smaller firm is like light years ahead from a technology standpoint. Let's not make sure we're making bad assumptions about what we're going to adopt. It might make perfect sense for the whale to adopt the technology of the minnow, so just being clear, again, no bad strategies, just unknown strategies. What do you want to happen? What's the strategy to help do that? And let's, execute flawlessly on that.
So I have a question about that, but I want to lay a little bit of groundwork first for the question, because I got to see a deal take place from the sidelines. I had no involvement in the deal whatsoever, but the buyer was a friend, and software engineer, software tech background, buying a accounting firm, buying a tax firm in particular. And something that was in his mind, I think, was very similar to a lot of people who are buying firms, especially when there's a mismatch of technology. But his idea was, I'm going to buy a tax firm that's a little bit more old school, and with my tech background, I'm going to overhaul their tech stack and improve their quality of life. And when he got in, he was very eager to do that, and ran into a ton of resistance with the staff. It was just too much too soon, and they went through burnout. So I guess, to frame my question, if you are a non-accountant technical buyer, but you are maybe from the tech space or software space, or you are, that minnow that's very tech forward, and you're buying the firm with, more of the outdated tech, how long does it take to properly implement those changes to the tech stack so that it is a quality of life improvement and not just a measure of burnout for the acquired team?
From a strategy and execution standpoint, you really have to take an inventory of everything that you want to do and prioritize it, because we can only absorb so much. right? And so we've got to do, stack rank all of our initiatives and say, where are the areas of our highest lift and least disruption, right? There is disruption. There's been a merger. We have a new name. Our paycheck is coming from a different organization now. There's lots of change that is upsetting to people, even though it might be better for them, right? We don't like change, and I think accountants take that to the nth degree. So we take our whole inventory of all the things that we want to do, and we stack rank them and choose our battles. I think if we're standing on ground that's constantly shaking like an earthquake, we are going to get exhausted, and we have to have some terra firma somewhere, something that is going to stay the same. And so for as much as we want to change things, I think you have to look at it and say, how can we balance this out with something that we're not going to change? We're intentionally going to leave this the same for a while so that I can get off the shaky ground for a little bit and go step over here and go, I can get a break now. There's no right or wrong answers to the timing of those things. It's like if the software conversion is where you think you're going to get the highest lift, that's high up on the calendar.
Okay. Well, because I was going to give some examples and see if I was understanding, and you could just tell me if I'm right or wrong. So to me, it sounds like you're buying the firm, you close. If you're going to add some internal communications, like you're going to go from Teams to Slack, probably not a big deal. You could probably do that right away-ish. If you're going to implement practice management software, you're probably looking at like a quarter or 2 quarters out. If you're changing your tax prep software, if you're going from UltraTax to CCH or to Lacert, you probably shouldn't plan on doing that until the end of year 1. Is that about right?
At least after tax season.
For sure.
Well, yeah, you have to factor tax season in and those things. That stack ranking process of these initiatives is what's the lift, what's the cost, right? How much disruption, how much time is it going to take, what's the risk of failure? All those things need to go into the cost side and deciding whether there's enough lift there versus the cost to do that or put that one higher up on the priority list.
And in all of those examples, I think I have a lot of folks who acquire a firm with the aspiration to make it remote. But in doing that day one, it is not usually a great fit for a company because it feels a lot like being fired. So, how long do you need to take the same office space to, be physically present on site, not running it from your sailboat in the Mediterranean, to, build rapport and get these initiatives adopted so that maybe one day people do feel comfortable with more remote work.
This is probably a good time for our favorite accounting CPA firm acquisition public service announcement. Do not talk about offshoring before you close.
Yeah, that is true. Please don't tell the seller, have a plan, but don't tell them if your plan is to take all the bookkeeping to the Philippines.
So the question about remote versus in office, I think it's what were both firms doing beforehand, right? And can that be one of our, areas of terra firma? If they were remote before, let's not bring them into the office. If they were in the office before, let's not send them home. And I will bring offshoring into it a little bit, but I think it goes into 2 firms coming together, 2 firms trying to do business with each other, a firm that was doing business in office and went remote. Like, do we have the process, systems, and structures to support it? Right? And if we didn't have that to support remote work when we all were used to working together in the office, it's going to be really difficult to bring in a new firm and expect them to adopt to us. Again, M&A readiness, do we have that stuff in place? If you ask yourself the question, well, I have a successful office in XYZ city. If I were to start another office in a different city, how long would it take to replicate what I have here, right? And a lot of firms will say, I have a fantastic thing going. We're lean, mean, efficient machine, and everything is great. Good. How long would it take you to replicate it? Oh boy. Then that tells you that there's a lot of informality in their systems and structure, and that's what makes it tick. That's really hard to replicate in a firm that you're starting or acquiring, and it's certainly hard to get efficient or effective relationships with offshore teams if you don't have those systems and structure in place.
So it's a really interesting point that you bring up around how long would it take for you to replicate your model? Because I come from venture-backed tech cloud, virtual accounting firms, to start up to multi-million in account and recurring revenue. So client acquisition is all we talk about. And even when I go into traditional firms, I'm talking to traditional CPAs, client acquisition is at the forefront of my mind because that's all we focused on. But when I'm reviewing deals for accounting firms that are for sale or working with an accounting firm that wants to sell, like, they can't explain how they get clients. It's like, well, somebody told somebody and they walked in the door and they just show up. I don't know. They just come in. But you can't repeat a model. You can't repeat a firm in another location without knowing how you're acquiring clients.
And most firms up to this point do not have good client getting systems. Yeah. They show up, and right now there's an abundance of clients. It's not a problem, which is bad because we're really not working on our client getting systems. I think we're going to see as we shift to advisory, we're going to see more and more commoditization of our core services, which is going to bring downward pressure on fees, which we either have to be really efficient and do a lot more of that, or we shift to advisory. And when you shift to advisory and you're talking about non-recurring projects, you need a client getting system where maybe you got away without one before. System is structure,
You cover the space in the continuum, before people are selling, and the M&A advisory, preparedness package of things, which I suspect is just good practice management that might even just help anyone, whether they're planning to sell or not, unless they're planning to live forever, I guess. And then on the other end, the post-merger, integration part of things, which a lot of the people like me, we just have a snapshot in the middle.
There's been a few projects where I've been able to get involved from, 18 months ahead of the transaction, really help out from an M&A readiness standpoint, see it through the transaction, and then get hired by the buyer to do post-merger integration on the other side. That's really fun if I can get to the opportunity to see the whole thing through.
Such great information about getting ready to buy or getting ready to sell. We love checklists. We talk about checklists all the time. So if you had a few things, and you can speak to whoever you want, like, we are targeting buyers mostly, but like you said, if you're not ready to buy, you're probably not ready to sell, so these are kind of, agnostic, sort of concepts. So what are some, 5 things maybe that you can do in your firm, or that you should plan on doing a firm you're going to buy, to make sure that you're positioned the best you possibly can be in the market?
There's a process that I go through that's just called scorecard, right? And it's basically a business valuation that's done to get a benchmark of where you are today. And this thing then points out what are the value drivers, what are the value drainers. And out of that comes an inventory of things that we're doing well that we should capitalize on. Let's improve upon them. And here's the things that are dragging us down. Let's fix these things. And again, we want to make good decisions about how we stack rank those things in areas of lift. And we can see how those things affect the valuation, and we can guide it in. So, technology use might be the biggest thing on one firm's plate. Human capital is huge right now. That you can't. I can't jump on LinkedIn without seeing an Accounting Today article or some other article about the CPAs resigning. We're not producing enough anymore. How are we going to do this? So attraction, retention, culture, those things are all huge. What are our initiatives around that? And how are we managing growth despite those things, right? My previous firm was a best place to work firm. Mixing in growth strategies with best place can be tough. I think we did it very effectively. We've got some things to back us up on that, some support to back us up on that we did, but it's challenging. It's an additional challenge, right? So, but if you break it down into human capital, structural capital, social capital, in a few different areas, and look at, okay, where are we strong? Where do we need shoring up?
There we go. So you can build a checklist from there. That sounds great. I mean, so if you're looking to sell, look at your value drivers, your value drainers. If you're in the middle of buying a CPA firm, you're in due diligence. It's a great exercise. Value drivers, value drainers.
Yeah, it is. It is a great exercise. Point you in the right direction. And I think in the CPA world, there's this fallacy of, I just call it the 1x fallacy. We're doing $1 million, we're worth $1 million.
Right.
Well, I don't know. Terms might change that. Whether it's all cash or all earn out, those kinds of things factor into it. 1x might be a place to start, but I've seen deal values all over that range. Pushing 2, some sub 1. So it really just depends, right? What's underneath driving it? It's if we have a shiny coat of wax on the car, but it doesn't run.
Yeah.
We're not going to be successful. So we need to be interactive with those checklists. I have a very detailed tech checklist that I use because I think that's really important. I mean, those are the tools of the trade, right? How difficult is this going to be? I think there's a great opportunity for, if we're talking about M&A readiness, if we're thinking about selling, to think about who's our potential buyer and what do they use? If we could start to emulate them before we get there and take some of the disruption out of the transaction post-closing.
That's true. Yeah.
It makes it more valuable to the buyer. We don't have to change much.
And that's how you could get to that 1.5 or even 2 times gross?
It's a way. There's a great story of this client that I had that they built this firm to sell to Cisco. Everything they did was about Cisco. And we would come to them and talk to them about tax planning, about restructuring stuff, and they're like, nope, that's not what Cisco buys. So we worked with them for 10 years with them shooting down everything that we said because that's not what Cisco buys. They sold to Cisco. Very successful transaction, and the 2 principals of the organization still work for Cisco. So, I don't recommend being that myopic. But if you looked at, here's 3 or 4 firms that we think we would do well with them. Take a look at what they're doing, how they're doing it. See if you can emulate them.
At that point, when you've, built a really good firm, do you ever think like, why sell? Why not just keep riding it out?
I call it the St. Charles paradox. And St. Charles was a very successful investment banking firm in Denver. You remember them? They're gone now. But they did a presentation. It was the 10 value drivers of a business. And I can only remember 2 of the 10. But the first one was run your business like you'd never sell it. And the second one was run your business like it's always for sale.
Oh.
And if you come at it with those 2 differing perspectives, you'll get to a good answer.
That sounds fantastic. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, you bet. This is fun. I appreciate you having me.
Brian, where can people find you?
At cpaedge.com. Emails Brian at cpaedge.com. Feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks for listening to episode 8. If this was helpful, listen to some of our other episodes. Give us a like and subscribe.
Big, I gotta make it just for my kids and for their kids' kids. That's wealth years and years. Promise my brother soon as he out to finish this bid, we finna do it bigger than anybody.